That's the sound of the Audiothingies MicroMonsta polyphonic synthesizer. And I like to do this detailed walkthrough so you can get an idea of what the unit is like to use and what the menu structure is like. And I'd like to start off by talking a bit about the actual physical interface. And on the back side, we have the power connection for 9V DC. We have USB connection for MIDI in and out, firmware update, and also for transferring wavetable files. You also have 2 MIDI connections for MIDI in and out, and 2 audio outputs for audio left channel and right channel. And if you just use the left channel like I'm doing in this video, you get a mono audio output. And on the front panel, you have volume control in the top right corner. And then you have 6 rotary endless push encoders. And you also have 9 buttons to take you through the menu pages. Right now you can see that I'm on the home page because the LED is lighting up just above the button that says home. And on the home page you can see that I have patch number 4 loaded in, or programs as it's called in the MicroMonsta. You can also see that I had 3 shortcuts here. So if I want to adjust the cutoff frequency, for example, I go to the 3rd encoder. If I want to load up an initialized patch, I can just hold the load button on the way over on the right here for about 1 second, and it says load program, initialized program. I press load again and I get an initialized program. You can also see that when I'm pressing down a key on my MIDI keyboard, it shows which voice is being used. I have actually chosen to create my own initialized program, so I'm going to load it by pressing load, turning this encoder that selects which patch to load, and go to the first one, which I have named Init, and I press load again to load it. And I mentioned before that these are push encoders, so if I send a modulation to the envelope 2, but I want to go back to the default setting of 0, I just push the encoder down and it goes to 0. The next thing I want to talk about is the oscillator page. So I head on to the oscillator page by pressing the oscillator button. And as you can see, when I push the button once, I go to oscillator 1. If I push it again, I go to oscillator 2. But the synthesizer also has a sub-oscillator, and I reach that one by pressing a 3rd time. Here I can also adjust the noise generator, the actual noise level, and the noise color. If I want to adjust the waveform of oscillator 1, I have to adjust it by turning the first encoder. Here you have the standard sinus wave, triangle, sawtooth, square. And then you also have a supersaw that's balanced, a supersaw that's unbalanced. You have a synced saw and a synced square. And then after that, you have a lot of more waves that I'll get to in a minute. But the first waveform that you have is called P6. And that's actually from the Audiothingies P6 synthesizer, which is like the prequel of the MicroMonsta. And it's a very interesting morphing oscillator. It goes from a triangle all the way to a pulse wave. You morph through it by adjusting the shape, which is this parameter. This is wave shape at 0, and then if I scroll through, you can hear that it scrolls through from a triangle all the way to a square wave or a pulse wave. And the next waveform is just a sinus wave. And the shape for this one is actually frequency modulation. Now it doesn't go as crazy as I'd like it to do, but it's nice if you want a simple patch and you want to add just some harmonics through this frequency modulation. The next waveform is the triangle wave. And if you go through the shape of the triangle wave, it starts to metallize. Until the very end, where you have an octave up plus a fifth. So it's a very interesting sweep. The next wave is a sawtooth wave, and it acts very much the same as the triangle wave when using the wave shape, but here is the dry sawtooth. And then if I shape it, this one just goes up an octave, so it doesn't add that fifth. The next wave is a very bussy square wave. And of course, it's just pulsed with modulation when using the wave shape. But it's nice, it goes all the way to the end. So the next wave is the super saw balanced wave. This is like the Roland super saw, 3 oscillators detuned from each other, and you control the detune with the wave shaping parameter. So this is with no wave shaping. And then if I turn up the wave shaping, it sounds like this. And it goes all the way to like a broken form. It's good for instant trance chords. And then you have the second one, which is unbalanced, and it sounds like this. So it goes into chaos as well there by the end. The next waveform is a synced saw, which is just 2 saw waves and they are synced to each other. So one is a slave to the other one. It's the classic synced sound. And after that we have the synced square, which is the same thing but with a square wave instead. And after that we have a couple of interesting waveforms from the Casio ZZ series. So they are phase distortion waveforms. And the first one is a resonant saw wave. And it sounds like this when you haven't applied any wave shaping. So very dark. But when you apply wave shaping, it sounds like opening up a filter with some resonance. And then you have the same type but with a triangle. And then the third one is a trapezoid. Which is like a mix between a square wave and a sawtooth wave. After these waveforms, you have a bunch of wavetables, you actually have 15 of them, and then you have 15 more which are empty that you can actually transfer your own wavetables into those spots. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically if we just go to like a random one, the fifth one for example, you scroll through the different waves in the wavetable with the shape parameter, of course. Some of them are more crazy than others. Let's try out the 10th one. So as you can hear, this 10th wavetable, it has a lot of waves inside of it. So if we want to use each one separately, if we want to scroll through them separately, we can go to it, but without interpolation. So we scroll through all of the wavetables when we get to where it says no interp. So let's go to the wavetable 10 no interp. And it sounds like this. And as I said, if I want to go to the next oscillator, I just press oscillator 2. I mean, I press the button once again and I get to oscillator 2. Maybe you immediately can tell that some of the parameters are different here, or at least two of them. If I go back to oscillator 1, here you have transpose and LFO 1, but on the page for oscillator 2, you instead have range. So if I turn up oscillator 2, so you can hear both oscillators. So now both oscillators are saw. And they are a bit detuned because I have set that under voice. I'll show you that later. But here you have range. So if I turn up the range, you can tune it to a 5th or a 7th. And then instead of having the oscillator wave shape sent to LFO 1, you can send it to envelope 3. But with the sawtooth, you can't really hear the changes in this case. I would have to turn it to maybe a sinus wave. And then finally, we have the sub-oscillator, which can be any waveform really, sinus, triangle, sawtooth, square. So any of the basic waveforms. And then it can be down 1 octave or 2 octaves. And then the mix parameter. It's really buzzy. And then you have the noise generator. You can turn up the noise level. But the noise generator also has its own filter. If you turn it positive, you'll get a lighter noise, so it's actually a high pass. And then negative becomes a low pass filter for the noise. And finally, we have the mixer section, which is actually reached by pressing Shift Mixer, like that. And here we can see that I currently have oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 about the same level. Then we have the sub-oscillator, and we also have a ring modulator. So if I turn down both the oscillators and instead turn up the ring modulator, you get this sound. So now I'm sending both the oscillators to the ring modulator. I can also increase the volume by turning up the VCA parameter. Although it says drive, it's not actually a drive to like overdrive the amplifier. It's just to turn up the volume if your patch has a really low volume. This is the filter page of the Audiothingies MicroMonsta. You have a 1-pole low-pass filter, a 2-pole, 3-pole, 4-pole, and then you have the 2-pole high-pass, the 2-pole bandpass, the notch filter, and also the phaser. So those are the filter types. And then you have the control for cutoff, resonance, the modulation of the cutoff via the envelope 2, and then via LFO 2. And you also have keyboard follow tracking here. So you can have it at 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. So let's listen to the one pole low pass filter at first. I'm gonna use my MIDI controller to control the cutoff so my hand is not in the way for the video. Sounds like this. With the resonance about halfway, it sounds like this. And then with the resonance at full, it sounds like this. The two poles sounds about the same, but a bit darker. And then with resonance at about halfway. And then resonance at full. You can hear that there's some stepping to the filter when, especially when the resonance is at full. Let's listen to the 3-pole filter. And then with the resonance at about halfway. And full way. With the 3-pole and now the 4-pole, you can really hear the resonance starting to sound very round and very refined. These filters aren't being driven in any way, so they are very clean, but they still have, I guess, together with the oscillator, they have quite a unique character to them still. So this is the 4-pole filter. And then resonance about halfway up. And then with the resonance all the way up. So it does step, but it also has this sing-song character, so you can kind of forgive the stepping. I'm gonna do a sweep with the encoder on the actual unit as well. The next filter is the high pass. I'm gonna do a chord for this one. And then with the resonance about halfway. And then all the way. Let's do one without doing a chord as well, just to have it cleaner. Let's move on to the bandpass filter. And then with resonance about halfway. And then let's just do one with full resonance, but without the chord. We have a notch filter as well. And if I turn up the resonance even more, to about halfway. And then if I turn up the resonance full. Let's take a listen to the phaser. And even more resonance. I'll do one with full resonance as well. So moving on to the envelopes, you have 3 of them, so you scroll through them by pressing the envelope button. They have at least control over the curve, so you can have the envelope type fast, exponential, and linear. The envelopes go from 1 millisecond to 30 seconds. And if I just illustrate with the exponential type here, playing around with the decay on my MIDI controller, you'll hear how it goes from clicky to, a bit slower. And the release is, it also goes from, being cut off immediately to very, very long, to 30 seconds, in fact. So I'm not going to illustrate 30 seconds, but here's around the value of 80. And then around 100. You also have a reset parameter here for if the envelope should reset for every key trigger or not. If you leave it at off, that's basically how an analog synthesizer would behave. And as I said, you have 3 of them. They are exactly the same, except envelope 1 is hardwired to amplitude, but you can still use it to modulate other sources in the modulation matrix, which we'll get to in a bit. The MicroMonsta also has 3 different LFOs, and you scroll through them the same way as you would with the envelope page. LFOs are very versatile because you have several different wave types, and as you can see, you also have 2 different ways of introducing the LFO. You have one delay parameter, which means that the LFO modulation amount of the LFO will be delayed for the amount of time that you have dialed in here. So it will wait a bit, and then it will apply 100% of the modulation that you have chosen. But you also have an attack parameter, which will slowly apply the amount of modulation that you have chosen. You also have a phase parameter. It applies to how the phase of the waveform will be for when triggering the LFO. And you also have a trigger reset. The reset of the LFO for if it should reset for each key trigger or not is described in detail in the manual, and I think it's better to read there than for me to explain, because I'm not going to say that I fully understand it. Moving on to the waveforms, you have sinus waveform, triangle, sawtooth, and square wave, which is basically what you would expect from any modern LFO, I would guess. But then you also have a good old sample and hold. And you have smooth random, which is very nice. And then you have stepped sequence. It's not a sequencer like sequencing notes, but it's sequencing the modulation amount per step for the LFO. You can go to the step sequencer by pressing Shift or Home and LFO or step, the green text. And here you can control the amount of modulation for each step. But you can also kind of use it as a step sequencer, and I'm going to show you how. It's not that easy to get a sequence that sounds in tune, but let's apply a bit of modulation for each step here. And as you can see, I changed the row here, and then I used the encoders to change the value. So let's do a bit of just random, something like that. And then let's go to the mod matrix and then apply LFO 1 to pitch coarse, and then plus 12. I think it will sound okay. And then, so LFO 1 is set to the step waveform with a speed of value 75. I don't know what the actual speed would be there, but here we go. Sounds like crap. So let's increase this to the full modulation, and hear what it sounds like. That kind of sounds better. So yeah, you can kind of use this step sequencer for the LFO as an actual step sequencer. I push down the fifth encoder to get a randomized sequence. And you can push down the different encoders and you'll get different variations of randomness. And of course, this also, if you apply this to like the filter cutoff, you get a good result as well. And speaking of the speed setting, you can go from the value of 0 all the way up to 127. But then it goes into synced mode from 16 bars, 3/4 of a bar, 2/3 of a bar, half a bar, 3/8 of a bar, etc., etc. And then it has all the way to 96 notes. This is synced to either the BPM that you set under the global setting, or the sync that you get from MIDI input. It doesn't get like into FM territory, but it's just around there. So it's not like this. But as you can hear, it's not that it's not trying to go into FM, it's that it breaks apart before going into the FM territory. You especially hear it if you use like a square waveform. And with even more modulation amount. It does something that I would expect from an analog synthesizer, that it kind of breaks apart a bit. Much like the Electron Analog 4, the LFO there can really sound broken, even more broken than a MicroMonsta, but it's in the same ballpark, I would say. So it's a very interesting consequence of using high speeds of the LFO. This is the modulation matrix of the MicroMonsta. You have 6 different patch chords, and you scroll through them by pushing the matrix button. So you have 2 patch chords per page. But you have to remember that even though you only have 6 patch chords, you have some of them which are fixed. Like on the filter page, you have LFO2 as a source going to the destination cutoff frequency. But that doesn't mean that LFO2 can't be used for any other destination or even the same destination here in the modulation matrix. Speaking of sources, you have quite a few of them that are very usable. Some which you'd expect, like maybe keyboard tracking, velocity, aftertouch. Then you have random, which I really like because it's a way to introduce variation between every node. So if I set destination of random to filter cutoff, and then minus here, it will randomly apply an amount between 25 and 0 for every key press. And if I turn it down even more, you'll hear a more drastic change between every key press. So you can imagine the possibilities of creating like patches that where every key press has just slight variation and you get a very organic sound. And we have more sources, envelope 1, 2, 3, LFO 1, 2, 3. And then for destinations, you have quite a few. You have pitch, which is coarse. So I'll apply LFO 1 and you'll hear. And then you have pitch, which is fine. It doesn't apply as much of a change of pitch. And you can also apply a pitch change to just one oscillator, oscillator 1 or oscillator 2. And also wave shape, noise color can be modulated, the mix of the different oscillators and rig mod and noise mix, filter cutoff frequency, filter resonance. And then also the attack time, decay time, release of all 3 envelopes and the speed of the LFOs. But one thing that's very interesting, I'm gonna default this. I'm gonna apply some modulation of the cutoff from LFO2 and then play around with something that's called the scaler, which goes hand in hand with the modulation matrix. So you press shift and scaler, and here we can scale the modulation with, for example, an envelope or with aftertouch. So let's select aftertouch, LFO2, and then just go full scaling. This means that when I just push down the key, nothing happens. But if I apply aftertouch, it will start to introduce the modulation depending on how much of aftertouch I apply. Furthermore, what's interesting is that at first I thought that a slew setting was missing for the waveforms of the LFOs, but let's go to LFO2 and a square, and let's remove the scaling. But there is a way to slew the square waveform or any other waveform by going to scale page number 2, and you have something called lag amount. Listen as I apply lag to LFO2. This is the LFO being sent through a low-pass filter. So you can have a square wave becoming a sinus wave. Or a saw wave. And in between those values, there are very interesting variations. What you're looking at right now is the Arpeggiator page. This is page 1. On page 2, we have a pattern editor. It's very advanced. You can do slides, accents. You can choose which note it's going to play in the chord that you're holding down and different things like that. But for the Arpeggiator, it's quick to get going. It's easy to use. And with the ARP on, it starts going as soon as you hold down a chord. And right now the style I have set up is up and down, but the first option is up. So it goes from the lowest note and through the chord to the highest note. And right now this is an A minor. And then you have triplet up, which is a bit unusual for an arpeggiator. Sounds really nice, especially if you hold down like a chord with more notes in it. And then down goes the opposite direction of up. It's from the highest note to the lowest. And then triplet down. And then you have up and down. And then random. So if I hold down a lot of notes, it will play it randomly. And then as played, that's basically in the order that I'm holding down notes. You have a gate, which is how long it will hold down every note in the pattern. And then you have octave. So if I hold down an A minor and then I choose one octave, it will go from the octave that I'm holding down and then up one octave as well. So even though I'm just holding down 3 notes, it goes up an octave from those notes as well. And you can go up to 3 octaves. And this is really nice if you have like triplet up, for example. Moving on, we have speed, which is synced to the BPM that you have either set internally in the synthesizer or from the sync going into the synthesizer. And then we have latch, and this is, if I turn latch on, I hold down a chord and then release the chord, it still goes on playing. But what's interesting about the latch is that if I turn off the arpeggiator and I hold down, for example, a chord with latch turned on but the arpeggiator turned off, it holds the chord, so it's a drone mode. And then I can go on tweaking. I have this endless drone going on. So let's get like a nice triplet up arpeggiator with latch on. And let's go to the pattern editor and just see what we can do. So as you can hear, now I turn down the length to just 4 steps, so it's just using the four first steps. And I have the first note being the lowest note and down an octave, and then I have the third note, the 7th note, and then just the arp note, and then I have different slides and stuff. So you can see immediately we got something going on that's not just the regular arpeggiator. The MicroMonsta has a few effects built in that you reach by pushing the effects button. The first effect in line is stereoizer, which I can't demonstrate right now because I'm just using mono sound. It's supposed to widen the stereo image, but just in a subtle way. The next effect is a ping pong delay, which of course I can't demonstrate either because of using just the mono output. But the next effect is a filtered delay, so it's just a delay with a filter. So as you can hear, when I turn down the cutoff, it filters the delay, so the delay signal gets darker for every time it hits basically. And if I turn it the other way into a positive value, it turns brighter. And you have time control and feedback. And what I like about this is that you can play around with the delay time without getting like a glitchy effect like this. The next delay being a modulated delay, so you don't have to actually rotate the encoder yourself. So you have an LFO and you can set up the speed and also the depth, and it affects the delay time. So it can get really, really freaky. So you can hear the LFO is very aggressive in this case because I have the depth turned up fully. And if you use it in a more subtle way, you'll just get this like almost like a tape delay with a wobble. The next effect is a chorus / flanger, but it's really just a very, very short delay. In this case, I guess it kind of sounds like a flanger. Since it's just a very short delay, you have the same parameters that you would expect from a delay. You have time, you have feedback, and in this case you have LFO speed and depth. And to set up like a chorus sound, set a very low delay time and high feedback. Let's go to the extreme with the settings. Now all there's left to look at are the shift parameters. We've looked at the mixer, so we're gonna jump straight to the voice by pressing Shift, Voice. The voice doesn't have any additional pages, so it's just this page. Basically, you can choose the synth mode from polyphonic 1 to monophonic, legato, and that's it. I usually leave it at polyphonic 2 because then it behaves like I would expect it to behave. I'm not exactly sure what polyphonic 1 is, but I think it acts like a Korg Poly 800, where it basically has just one filter chip and one amp. The next parameter here is the unison, and you can have 4 voices playing at the same time. And then you have some of the most interesting features of the synthesizer, I would say, being the 2 detune parameters. You have 1 detune parameters between the oscillators, and then 1 detune parameter for the voices. So if I just turn up oscillator 2 as well, I'll turn the detune between the 2 oscillators to 0. Nothing really happens when I press a note several times. The only thing you hear there being a variation is the variation in phase of the waveform. But if I turn up the detune, you'll hear them start to beat against each other. But what's really crazy is when you start to turn up the voice detune, because then it detunes the voices. So every time you press a new key, you initiate one more voice, and it's more detuned the more the higher value you have here. So if I play like 2 notes and I turn it up, you'll hear it start changing a lot. To the point where it sounds broken. And if you have that at maximum and also the oscillators detuned against each other, you just get a mess. You can dial them down to like around the value of 10 to 20 and you get like a very naturally evolving sound. If I just load up my initialized program, you can see that I have the voice detuned to 10 and then the oscillator detuned to 15. So if I turn up oscillator 2, you'll hear how it changed for every time I press a key. The next shift menu is global. Here you actually have 2 pages. The first page shows you settings for the pitch bend amount, for glide, and then a global EQ, which is just a high pass filter and a low pass filter that doesn't go into extremes. And then the internal BPM. So the bend, first of all, you know how this works, but it goes up 2 octaves. And then the glide time is quite long at maximum. And then for the EQ, just to demonstrate it. So if you have a patch that's where you're already utilizing the filter, maybe a high pass filter, but you want to keep the sound dark, even though you can't with a high pass filter, you can use this global EQ. And then BPM, it goes all the way up to 255 and all the way down to 20. Moving on to the next page of the global shift setting. Here you have the encoder assignations. For the home page, you have these shortcuts that I was talking about in the beginning of the video, and this is where you set them up. The next shift menu that we haven't looked at is the Chorder, which is also a very advanced feature of this synthesizer. As you can see right now, I have it set up so it's in the key of C, it's playing the major scale, and then it's playing these 3 intervals. So if I turn on the Chorder and I play a key, it plays some kind of chord, but it has these weird intervals set up so it doesn't sound that good. But if I turn off these intervals, you're gonna hear that it's not playing a chord. So it's not really only a chorder, it's also a tool to help you play in a key. So if I want to play in the key of C major, I can just press any key on my MIDI controller now, and it's gonna be in the key of C major. Let's put it in harmonic minor, and now I'm just gonna go from D and up on the white keys. So it didn't really sound like I was going up on the white keys, but I was. But the synthesizer played it in the key of C harmonic minor. But to play a chord, I have to set up the intervals. So let's set up a chord here. The first interval being a third, one being a fifth, and then a seventh. Now I have a chord. The very last shift menu is System. This is where you can set up your MIDI channel and also where it's going to receive MIDI from. In this case, I have the DIN connection, but you can also choose USB. And then clock, if it's going to be the internal clock or the external. And also what to do with the out. You can have it as a MIDI through, it's called soft through, or it can send CC out, or ARP notes out, or it can act as the master in a polychain setup, because you can actually polychain one MicroMonsta with another one, or a polychain slave. And then you have this UI setting, which every time I select a parameter, it displays like this, and this is the screen time that it will stay up. So if I have it longer, it stays up longer. And then encoder acceleration. Then we have a page 2 of system, and here you can tune it, and then you have these tools where you can save the settings, your system settings, but you can also put the synthesizer in update mode and so on. And the very last shift menu is the save. So if you have a patch and you want to save it, you shift save, and then you just press again to actually save it. And that's it for the Audiothingies MicroMonsta. I know that there's a lot of stuff in the manual that I have not brought up, but I think it's good to actually read the manual and also watch this video to see things that you read in the manual actually being utilized, and how it sounds and how it works. And it's a very simple synthesizer to use, and even though you're limited to these 6 encoders, it's really fast to go through these pages. And I haven't gone through like importing wavetables because I haven't tried that yet. I know that you really have to have a PC or run a Mac through Wineskin or like a virtual environment for Windows. If you made it this far into the video, I'd like to really thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something about the MicroMonsta. Earlier this year, I released an album called Dark Star. It's available on Google Music, Spotify, and iTunes. You can also listen to it on this YouTube channel. But if you really want to support me directly, you can go to my bandcamp and consider purchasing the album there. I'm also working on a drone EP that I'm planning to release on the 5th of November. And it's actually produced entirely on the Audiothingies MicroMonsta running through a Zoom MS100 BT pedal. So if you're interested in what the MicroMonsta is capable of, please stay tuned for the 5th of November when I'm planning to release the drone EP. But until then, I'd like to play a preview of a track that might end up on the EP, and I hope you like it.